Hello. Hello. I think the live stream has started, hopefully. Huge thanks to Victoria and Nikki for actually making this work with essentially no lead time, because I did not do a good job of planning this, which is good. We're not here to have a well-executed thing. We're here to have a last-second thing. Hi, Brandy. Thank you again, Brandy. Thanks also to Nikki and to Victoria for making this work. Hi. Okay. So I guess since earlier today we had the chat with Wendy Perlman about we crossed a bridge and it trembled, which is actually providing part of my tripod. It's part of my tripod setup right now at the moment. But I thought it was a really wonderful conversation. Very grateful to Dr. Perlman, although she didn't want us to call her doctor. But I feel like if you go to Harvard and you get your PhD, then you get to be called doctor for the rest of your life. I feel like that's like part of the deal. At any rate, there's a very strange noise underneath me, but I'm going to assume that it's Sarah and the garage door. Otherwise, big trouble. Right. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of update on where Life's Library is, also, and talk about the work that you're supporting in Sierra Leone. We're just starting to talk more about this work. This is something that Hank and I and Sarah and Catherine and our parents have been working on with Partners in Health for over a year, getting to this point. But now we're getting to the point where with our most trusted network, I guess, we're starting to talk a little bit more about the project and the plan. And so I wanted to take this opportunity partly to do this, but also because I can answer your questions. I can see you all in chat, including, I think that's Weird Al, which I don't know if it's Weird Al Yankovic himself, but if it is, that's pretty cool. Thanks for coming and for being a member of Life's Library. But to give you a Life's Library update, generally, we are we're a little over like a third. We're between a third and a halfway done with the first year. We would like this to be an ongoing concern. I think we've learned a lot. I think that there's still some stuff we're working out. We're still figuring out what kind of books people like to read together. We're still trying to. I also think like there's a, like figuring out like what the job of both the kind of what the curator job is on our end, and then what the job of the reader is on the other end is an interesting process, and I think something that we still have a lot to learn about, and we're still figuring stuff out on that front. I am really enjoying the Discord. I think that a lot of people find Discord very overwhelming and struggle to figure it out. So we're having to grapple with that and what the best way forward is in the context of, hi, Sarah.
Hi.
I was hoping that was you and not a robber. For the next hour, I'm going to be in here talking on a live stream. So this may not be the best place to work.
It's not that. I have Chris right.
He already came.
Oh.
We already talked about it and he left.
Oh.
Yeah. And it wasn't Chris. It was someone else. But we can talk about it later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
He's come and gone. Just doing some household. We're the co-CEOs of the household. So, right. I feel like we're learning a lot. The turnover has been higher than we wanted it to be. Like more people have left after each book than, we were hoping for. That said, like I feel like the community's pretty strong. I don't know how y'all feel, but I'm very happy for how the community's going, and I like the fact that we're reading different kinds of books. Oh, it's Weird Ral, not Weird Al. So I'm sorry about that. Will Life's Library end after a year? Hopefully not, because part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build. We tend to think of a lot of times the thing that the internet is best at is responding to emergencies. especially when it comes to philanthropy and charitable, like raising money for charitable causes. The internet's really, really good at responding to emergencies, right? Like the internet did an amazing job of responding to the burning of the cathedral at Notre Dame. Like I think over $1 billion was raised. And that's not in any way to slight that people making those gifts or people responding to emergencies. Like emergency response is important. It's not to me an either or, it's a both and, but we're really good at responding to emergencies as a, like the online world. Humans in general are kind of emergency response, organisms. But I think like collectively, we also tend to gravitate toward emergency response, not least because we can accomplish things, or like we feel powerless in the face of emergencies. And this feels like something we can do. And so one of the reasons we want Life's Library, look, I want it to work long-term because I think it's awesome and I love doing it and it brings me a lot of joy. Hi, Emma. And I hope that it brings other people joy too. But one of the reasons that we want to continue doing Life's Library long-term is that we want to provide ongoing, open-ended support for Partners in Health's work in Sierra Leone. Yeah. So I understand a lot of people are saying the Discord is a bit much for them and makes them feel old. So if you can hang out in Discord for a while, it gets less overwhelming. But I will be the first to admit that like you go on there and you're like, oh my God, this is, especially as an old person, I'm 41. You're like, oh God, there's a lot of things happening on the left side of the screen. There's a lot of things happening on the right side of the screen. I don't know how to handle this. But hopefully we can have, so I think part of it, look, I think one thing is making the Discord as like user-friendly as possible, which I think the mods do an amazing job of. And I think they work incredibly hard to make that work. And I'm so grateful to them. I think another thing is if for people who don't want to use the Discord or who can't use the Discord because they're old like me, is building materials around the books that can support them and support communities that they can be a part of. So yeah, I think that's the path forward. And maybe these live streams will be part of that. I don't know. Yeah, the reason we don't want to use Slack, I mean, I like Discord, but the main reason is money. I care a lot more about the money because it's not, our money. It's Partners in Health's money, and like, I just care a lot about that. So, yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Partners in Health and the work that you've been funding without knowing it in Sierra Leone, and why we think that's so important and why we're trying to build. So DFTBA.com and Life's Library and a couple other things that we do are transitioning away from being like traditional businesses and toward being businesses that will provide ongoing support to improving healthcare systems for people at risk, which at least for the first several years is going to mean working to support Partners in Health's work in Sierra Leone. But to do this, I have to screen share my entire screen, and I'm going to try that. Is this working? Like when you see that, do you see that? Hopefully, yes. So I'm gonna just walk you through a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, it is working. I'm just gonna walk you through this PowerPoint presentation, and we'll see how that goes. I don't know. This is the PowerPoint presentation I made for my brother to try to get my brother to give a lot of money, and Catherine, and it worked. Not to brag. Okay, so how do I just present this though? It's not file. It's hitting the present key. All right. So we think that long-term problems require long-term solutions, and emergency response is incredibly important. Is my camera still working? Now I'm worried. It is working. All right. I'm making too big a deal out of this. I'm just going to do it and we'll see how it goes. We think long-term solutions require long-term problems require long-term solutions. The internet is really good at emergency response. It is really bad at long-term thinking a lot of times. So this is Sierra Leone's healthcare system. Sierra Leone has the highest maternal mortality rate in the world. 1 in every 17 women in Sierra Leone will die in pregnancy or childbirth. That is a shockingly high mortality rate. There are a lot of reasons for it, but the fundamental reason is that the healthcare system is very, very weak, especially I guess, like when you go above the primary healthcare system, but really the whole system is extremely weak. Sierra Leone also has the highest child mortality rate in the world, or one of the highest, depending on how it's being calculated. There are only about 150 doctors in the entire country, and there are very few specialists. So there's 1 cardiologist, there's 1 neurologist. In fact, the neurologist has been out of the country for the last several months. And this is a country of over 7 million people. So for context, Indiana, my home state, has a smaller population than Sierra Leone, and we have about 14,700 doctors. We have hundreds of neurologists, hundreds of cardiologists. So the healthcare system is very, very weak, and it's very fragile, and that's why Sierra Leone has a much higher maternal mortality rate and a much higher child mortality rate, even than neighboring countries that are also very poor. So Liberia and Guinea, the other nations, the nations that neighbor Sierra Leone, and were also affected by the Ebola crisis in 2014, by the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014. In both Liberia and Guinea, the maternal mortality rate is 75 or 80% lower than it is in Sierra Leone. Like I said, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's complicated. It is a complicated problem. Pretending that it is simple does a disservice to the people who are working very hard in very difficult circumstances to try to make it better. But I think that the two things I would highlight are, first, that weak systems lead to mistrust of systems. So when you have, and maybe I'll come, well, no, when you go to the doctor and there is nothing in the clinic, there are no antibiotics, there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's just nothing. You don't trust the system, because you shouldn't trust the system, because the system has failed you. And so I think that seems like it's a big issue. And then there is what Partners in Health describes as acute on chronic problems. So, when you take a chronically weak system, or you take a chronic issue, and then something acute happens on top of that, it's much, much worse. So the Ebola outbreak's a great example of this. The Ebola emergency in West Africa was an emergency because of weak healthcare systems, not because Ebola is so difficult to treat and to stop spreading. It's not that difficult to stop Ebola from spreading, as evidenced by the fact that there are never widespread outbreaks of it in wealthy countries. And then the other thing is that there was a tremendously destructive civil war in Sierra Leone that devastated every system in the country, devastated everything. That war both caused and was caused by weak systems. So all of that means that there's a lot of risk. There is, I think there's no getting around the fact that there is a lot of risk in this. I'm going to come back for a little bit. Hello, it's me. There's a lot of risk in this kind of work, especially in a place like Sierra Leone, where there's so much need. the need is really overwhelming. And if I emerged from anything from our week there, it's that, you know, this would be an emergency anywhere else. You know, the fact that 3,000 women are going to die in the Kono district, where Partners in Health is doing most of its work, which is the diamond mining district in Sierra Leone. The fact that 3,000 women are going to die this year in childbirth is an emergency. And we know that almost all of those deaths are preventable. You know, if there were safe C-sections, if there were safe places for women to stay who had high-risk pregnancies while they waited to deliver, you know, we know that almost all those deaths are preventable. But we don't treat it like an emergency because it's unfolding over time and because it's been unfolding for years. And so it seems normal and it seems natural, but it's not. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. It doesn't have to happen. We know that it doesn't have to happen because we've seen other countries with very limited resources find ways to build systems stronger that serve the vulnerable populations in their communities, you know, which usually includes women and children. So just to go back real quick to my slideshow, if I can. I want to screen share. Yeah, I just want to screen share again. I feel like this is almost working. Okay, so the system, if you think of the system as sort of a pyramid, you start with the community health workers. And so one of the problems I think with philanthropy, with the way we think about charity these days, is we tend to think of it as people with money giving money to people without money. And I think that it works better when we conceive of it as an exchange of expertise, an exchange of experience, an exchange of gifts and talents, and yes, also exchanges of wealth. So on the right, smiling there, you see Ruth, who's a community health worker in Kono district in Sierra Leone. On the left, you see a baby and one of Ruth's patients. So Ruth's patients, most of them have been diagnosed with HIV or with tuberculosis. And what Ruth does is she goes out into her community, and every day she visits between 20 and 25 patients who are her patients. And she's able to, using that, you can see her phone in her hand. There's an app on her phone that allows her to track the progress of her patients, track their adherence to medication regimens and other things, so that when there are problems or there are issues, she can also send folks to get to the doctor, basically to get, you know, to primary healthcare, or even to secondary healthcare, can refer people to the government hospital there. There's one hospital in this district that has 550,000 people. So Ruth and other community health workers are the people who are really, you know, in communities working with the, you know, vulnerable people who live in absolute poverty, who also have, you know, life, like, you know, big chronic health problems like HIV or TB. The reason that I said earlier, like, I don't think that we should think of this as a one-way street, is that this is a very interesting model that I think we can learn from for how to help people who have serious healthcare problems, right? Not making them come always to the system in order to get care, but also saying the system will come to you if you have, you know, a chronic problem that makes it difficult for you to come to the system. And I think we have a lot to learn from imagining the relationship between the system and the people it seeks to serve, and understanding how people in communities with very limited resources are finding ways to still, you know, to still reach out to each other and get each other care and learn about best practices and stuff like that. The problem, that said, like, these problems are extremely complicated, and I think one of the things that we saw is that it's not as simple as any vertically based intervention. So that's kind of like a phrase in, I'm going to stop screen sharing again for a second. I should probably just screen share or not screen share, but anyway, that's like a phrase in global health that I think most people don't know what it means. I didn't know what it meant until it was explained to me very carefully. But you could think of a vertical intervention as being like one thing that seeks to solve one problem. So it might be, like, and by the way, I'm not saying that all vertical interventions are bad, because that is also an oversimplification. But say, for instance, like you notice that bed nets prevent malaria, which they do, and reduce the number of people who get malaria. So you inundate a community with bed nets. I think that can be very, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm also not here to criticize anything. I think that can be effective. I think it's been shown to be effective in some circumstances. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't strengthen the system. Another example is there is like, and this has saved literally millions of lives. There is much more availability of antiretroviral therapy in poor communities than there used to be, and that has reduced the number of deaths from HIV really, really dramatically. And it is one of the great successes of global health in the last 20 years. But it is not uncomplicated. So, like, one example of this that we saw is Ruth was visiting one of her patients, and she said, "Did you take your medication today?" Which is it's so different than if I go to my psychiatrist and my psychiatrist says, "Have you been taking your medication?" And then you're like, "Yeah, yeah, sometimes, usually." But if you're able to go and talk to someone every day or every 2 days, you can say, "Did you take your medication today?" Which is a much more specific question and leads to, I think, probably more informed answers. And anyway, so Ruth asked, "Did you take your medication today?" And the woman said, "No." And Ruth said, what are some of the barriers to you taking your medication? Do you not have access to it? Do you know? And she said, and I guess some of the drugs that you take in this kind of antiretroviral therapy cocktail to treat HIV are very hard to take on an empty stomach. They can make you feel really nauseated. They can make you throw up. If you take them on an empty stomach, she hadn't eaten that day because she hadn't been able to access. She didn't have any food, and so she hasn't been able to take her medication. So you think, okay, let's solve the problem. You solve the problem of there not being good access to HIV care by making sure medication is available. You solve that problem. Very difficult problem to solve, but you solved it. But if you don't strengthen the systems around people who are really, really vulnerable, like people who can't afford to eat, then sometimes they can't take their medication because they don't want to throw up, because and we saw versions of that several times, and it's and so that's a really complicated problem. So when I'm talking about systems, I guess that sounds like kind of abstract probably, and not, but that's what I mean. Systemic intervention is about improving access to healthcare, which includes improving access to nutrition. It includes improving access to ambulances in the case of rural, primary healthcare centers that need to be able to get patients to hospitals when there is an emergency. So, and that involves fuel for those ambulances. It involves electricity. It involves getting running water installed, like they did in the Kesey Psychiatric Hospital. So when you do one intervention or another, you often learn that systemic intervention is necessary. So, right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now, and I'll get through the rest of this quickly, and then I'll look at your questions. I'm sorry that I'm not looking at them. Oh, now I'm presenting, but I'm not sharing my screen. There's a lot of steps. Right. Okay. Now I'm sharing my screen. Now I am presenting. Okay. So this was a healthcare center, a primary healthcare center that we visited in Kono district that has no support. And you see a woman there with her child. Her child was there to get vaccinated. And in fact, every person who was at that primary healthcare center was with a child, and they were there to get vaccinated because that is most of what that primary healthcare center can do. They have vaccines. The vaccines are cold, and that's great. And people are getting, kids are getting vaccinated. I think vaccination rates aren't as high as they should be, but they're not. They're not terrible. And but there's no running water at this healthcare facility. There is no electricity. We saw the pharmacy, and there were very few medications. There were no antibiotics for adults. We saw the I don't know if I have a picture of it. We saw the room where like patients stay when they're sick, and it was not good. The laboratory doesn't have the ability to analyze blood. All they have is a microscope, so they can diagnose some things with the microscope, but without the ability to do any blood tests. There's a lot of you can't identify, for instance, women who are at high risk of hemorrhaging after giving birth. You can't. There's a lot of things you can't do if you can't test blood. So yeah, it was really harrowing and very sad to be there. And I said earlier that there's 150 doctors in the country. It's not because Sierra Leone doesn't train doctors, but a lot of doctors leave, and I think it's easy to judge that decision. Doctors go practice in other countries with stronger healthcare systems and where they can be paid more. I understand why it's easy to judge that decision, but I also think it's important to understand how frustrating it would be as a healthcare provider to have patients come to you and to know what you need to do to save their lives, and to not have the resources to do so. To not have the blood to do a blood transfusion, to not have the medications that you need to treat treatable illnesses, to watch kids die of TB and malaria and diarrhea. When you know how to treat those diseases, you just don't have the resources to. So I don't think it's as simple as saying like, oh, they leave for more money. I mean, I think any of us could imagine how difficult that would be. This is the Well Body Clinic, which is another primary healthcare center in Sierra Leone. This place, the first center that we visited, had about 10 patients per day. Almost all of whom were there to get vaccinated. The Well Body Clinic has about 250 or 300 patients a day. It's incredible. It is incredible what they do with limited resources there, but they have electricity, they have running water, they have a laboratory that works, they have lab technicians who are really good, they've got really good prenatal care. They even have these buildings where women who have high risk pregnancies and who live in rural areas, for the last like 4 to 6 weeks before they deliver, women can stay in this in this facility so that they don't have to try to get in an ambulance if they need a C-section. And because there are no ambulances, or very few ambulances, what usually actually happens is that there is an issue with a home delivery or a delivery at a primary healthcare outpost, and there is no way to get to the hospital. Well Body Clinic is the staffing is amazing, largely because of, partly at least, because of support from Partners in Health, also because the doctor who founded Well Body Clinic, Dr. Barry, is just an incredibly impressive person. And he was sort of the first partner of Partners in Health in Sierra Leone. But yeah, it's just an amazing group of people, amazingly dedicated. We saw class. I mean, it was night and day from the the primary healthcare outposts that don't have the kind of support that WellBody does. And that seeing that disparity made me understand that if the primary healthcare system was as strong everywhere in Kono district as it is at WellBody, maternal and child mortality rates would plummet. This is the hospital, or was the hospital in Kono before Partners in Health started working there. I think it's easy to, I mean, you know, obviously the fact that there's no running water, there's no toilets. On the left there is the maternity, or maybe the right as you're looking at it, the one with the blue columns, that's the maternity ward, and that is a dirt floor. And you can see up that like there's light coming from the sky. That's because the roof was not really functioning. But I actually think like the most disturbing thing about these pictures is that there are no patients. In 2014, 2015, when Partners in Health started working in Kono district, there were no patients at the hospital. And we heard a lot when we were in Sierra Leone that almost everyone who died of Ebola did not die of Ebola because the healthcare system shut down. People died of, you know, they died of malaria, they died of typhoid, they died of all kinds of infections. They died of malnutrition, you know, and there was no healthcare system at all to help them. But people didn't trust the hospital. This is the hospital now. This is the maternity ward now. You can see there's tile floor, there's electricity, there's running water. It's a safe place to deliver babies, but there are also only 40 maternity beds in a district of 520,000 people. So that's not enough. There's an OR, but there's only one. So that's not enough. It's not enough for women to be able to deliver babies safely. And then there is no NICU. There's no like neonatal intensive care unit. There is a unit where babies are get treatment, but it's not good. There's no, sorry. There's no incubators. There's no ventilators. Yeah, I mean, if you're a sick kid, it's a difficult place. Yeah, but you can see there are patients here. The hospital is now like people trust it a lot more. People come to the hospital, which is a huge shift from 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. But we need to make the hospital better, a lot better, so that it builds people's faith in the system, and they know that if they come to the hospital, even with a complicated pregnancy, even if they have complications, that they have a good chance of surviving, and that their babies have a good chance of surviving, and that they'll get good care, and they can get it, and that it will be available to them. So yeah, that is the job that we have set for ourselves. We're looking at this as a 5-year plan, but that's because it's best usually to plan in 5-year increments, not because the job ends in 5 years. Because I think this is an open-ended commitment, and I think that we need to think about long-term problems as having long-term solutions. And I think being obsessed with how do these interventions reach the point of sustainability is just, frankly, I think it's the wrong way to think about it. I think the right way to think about it is because like nothing, you know, nothing about our lives is sustainable. Like lives end. That's the nature of lives. We have an opportunity to invest in a place with extremely weak systems, and where people are, 9 or 10 women are going to die in childbirth in Kono district today. So I think of this as an open-ended commitment. Partners in Health always talks about the 4 S's. Sometimes they say the 5 S's now: space, staff, stuff, and systems, also social support. one thing I saw over and over again in Sierra Leone is that there's a great Kurt Vonnegut line. One of the flaws of the human character is that everybody likes to build and nobody likes to do maintenance. We saw again and again that things get built and then don't get maintained because there isn't ongoing support for them, and because people like capital campaigns more than they like ongoing support campaigns. People like to think in terms of 1 and 2 year grants and not in terms of long-term investment in a system to strengthen it. And we want to do that differently. So we want to help Partners in Health make a long-term ongoing investment. That's why we're trying to organize so much of the ongoing revenue from our companies toward Partners in Health, so that it can have a kind of ongoing funding source that's hopefully reliable. We want to radically reduce maternal and child mortality in Kono District, but we want to do that. We want to do that. I'm going to come back now. The reason that we want to, how do I stop screen sharing? Oh, it's me again. We want to do that as a model for the rest of the country, and also a model for other countries where child and maternal mortality are extremely high. They're usually linked to each other. So we want to do it. This is work in a district of 520,000 people. But the idea is to make the argument that for relatively little money, I mean, a lot of money, a ton of money, but relative to the cost of the U.S. healthcare system, you can make a huge difference. And that if we invest in strengthening systems at this this level that big aid organizations can afford, you can have big. You can really reshape what happens to people's lives, and whether or not they get to raise their kids, and whether or not their kids get to have healthy, productive lives, whether or not they get educational opportunities, and so on. So there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic concept of what we want to do, and that's what you've been supporting. So when you see the Well Body Clinic there that's seeing 250 or 300 patients a day, that's you supporting them. When you see Ruth, the community health worker, she works for Partners in Health, so you pay her salary. Not all of it, obviously, but you do pay it through your Life Library memberships. And when it comes time to announce this, when we know more about it, hopefully in the next couple months, we are going to ask you, if you can, to join us in making a long-term commitment. So to join us in making a monthly or annual contribution to this project in Sierra Leone, and to make that commitment for at least 5 years. That's what we're doing. So that's a little bit about what we're doing, and then I want to answer all your questions. Yeah, I mean, 520,000 people. So I guess one of to give you a sense of it, Kono District has, the biggest city is Koidu Town, which I think has 120,000 people. And then there are several other population centers. There's several other largish towns, small cities. I wouldn't know how to describe them. But the primary healthcare system is kind of a ring around the central hospital. And so if you think of 6 primary healthcare centers that ring this central hospital, and then the central hospital is the hub of the wheel, that's sort of the structure of it. But again, aside from Well Body Clinic, those other primary healthcare centers are so, I mean, there's very little there. I mean, it's kind of an exaggeration even to say that they're healthcare centers, since you don't get healthcare there really. Yeah, so I want to be able to answer your questions. Lisa says, why did PIH choose this particular district? So 2 reasons. One, it's the poorest district in Sierra Leone. It's the richest district in Sierra Leone in the sense that the diamond mines there are very lucrative, but the government does almost none of that wealth stays in Sierra Leone, because the mining rights were sold or 99 years of the mining rights were sold during the Civil War to companies that I think are headquartered in South Africa. So it's the poorest district in terms of percent, or one of the poorest districts in terms of percentage of people who live in absolute poverty. And then also there's it's the center. I mean, I don't know that has the worst maternal mortality rate. I don't know that it's been calculated that way, but it's where they sensed the need was greatest. And then the second thing is that because of Dr. Barry and Well Body Clinic, there was a partnership where they could go in and build from there. But the idea is that if you can make the argument that this is doable in the poorest district in, the country with the weakest healthcare, or one of the weakest healthcare systems in the world, then hopefully, yeah. How much do we donate to Partners in Health? It depends a lot on the book. Not so much on the price of the book as on the weight of the book. I would say the weight of the book is the central determinant of how much money gets donated to Partners in Health every month. Shipping costs. I should do a separate Life's Library live stream about the absolute insanity of the contemporary global shipping system. As an aside about that absolute insanity, you cannot ship things to Sierra Leone reliably. Period. That is the end of the sentence. Like, if you want to, like, I met this kid and we were talking about Liverpool, as as I like to talk about. And afterwards, I was like, "Can I get that kid a Liverpool soccer ball?" And they were like, "Yeah, but you've got to like bring it in your suitcase next time." So, yeah, but yes, I mean, the shipping situation is such that like shipping is the biggest determinant of cost. And then, there are certain fixed expenses. For those of you who are digital subscribers, there are some fixed expenses that that matter a lot, that kind of shape what happens each month. But so far, at least, and then we need to keep the numbers high. So we need to minimize the number of people who cancel their subscriptions and maximize the number of people who fill those slots so that we don't have extra books in the warehouse. That's another potential big expense. So it's always 5 digits. Who funds these clinics? Does the government pay for part of it? Do citizens pay for health insurance? Great question, Natalie. So, does the government pay for part of it? Yes. The government has about, if I'm remembering this correctly, about between $45 and $55 per person to spend on healthcare per year. So, as you can imagine, that's not enough. That's not enough. It's not enough to, yeah. That's the end of the sentence. $55 per person per year is not enough to fund a healthcare system that works. There are poor countries that fund better healthcare systems than Sierra Leone. The reasons for that are complicated. Some of it, like I said, has to do with, the other thing about the Ebola crisis is that Sierra Leone lost 15% of its healthcare workers to Ebola. Some of it is about the weakness of other systems in the country. I think Sierra Leone's GDP is somewhat inflated by minerals that don't end up, very little of that wealth stays in the country. But yeah, so the government and Partners in Health works with the Ministry of Health. So this won't be like a private hospital. Like the KGH, the government hospital where, you saw those pictures of the dirt floor, like that's a government hospital. And it's funded in partnership with Partners in Health. So Partners in Health helps pay for it, helps pay for the medications, helps pay for the build out, helps pay some of the salaries of the healthcare workers. But it's in kind of constant conversation with the government about, you do X, we'll do Y. Do citizens pay for health insurance? No, not generally, at least. There is and most healthcare services are supposed to be free in the country, or not most, but primary healthcare is supposed to be free, and then certain treatment for certain chronic conditions like tuberculosis is supposed to be free, and I think maternal care and infant-related healthcare is supposed to be free. Functionally, there are sometimes fees for service, but like things like, for instance, we met a young woman who'd had a stroke when she was 18, and she needed occupational therapy, she needed physical therapy to recover, as much strength as she could from the side of her body that was affected by the stroke, and that is not covered under the government's healthcare plan. So she either has to find $30 a month, which is a lot of money in Sierra Leone, or depend upon support from an organization like Partners in Health. Happy to keep answering more questions about that, though. Okay. If there are still books in warehouses, as John says, are they available to purchase? Great question, Nathan, and more of a question from Brandy than from me. What type of government did they have in Sierra Leone? It is a democratically elected government. It was not always, but it is now, and they just had a peaceful transfer of power. There are two major political parties in Sierra Leone. It's sort of like the Republicans and the Democrats here, complete with lots of people saying they're basically the same. But then lots of other people saying, how can you say they're basically the same, X, Y, and Z? And then someone else saying, can't we just talk about football? Which is a pretty common conversation that I had. Could we work with a shipping company to make Life's Library cheaper and for them to support Partners in Health? If I'm gonna give UPS that good press, I want them to spend the money. I want them to give money directly to Partners in Health. That's my own feeling. But lots of questions about audiobooks and ebooks, and is that going to be part of Life's Library, which are great questions. Ebooks are incredible. I mean, they're both really complicated. They're both really complicated in part because, Brosiana and I have a complicated relationship with Amazon, I think is the way of putting it generously. We don't think that Amazon should have a monopoly on the book market. But also they're complicated because of DRM and geolocation rights, and you're not supposed to sell American audiobooks in the Netherlands and yada, 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 yada. But we're looking into it. We're trying to figure it out. It's complicated. There's a lot of intellectual property is complex, which is why copyright law is now enforced primarily by vigilante mobs rather than, say, a legal system. Is there anything we can do outside of Life's Library? Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot we can do. I think there's a financial component to this. I think there's a financial, just in general, in thinking about our philanthropy as individuals and as communities. I think we need to focus on ongoing emergencies, emergencies that have been unfolding for a long time, like the fact that 40,000 women are going to die in childbirth in Sierra Leone this year, and that at least 90% of those deaths are very easily preventable and should never happen. But I also think the reason those horrors are allowed to unfold in an ongoing way is because of the kinds of things we pay attention to and the ways that we pay attention. And so we talk a lot about awareness and in activism and in philanthropy. And I think awareness is really important, but as something that Dr. Perlman said today and something that we heard earlier in our Q&A with Jacqueline Woodson, is that a lot of times awareness is an outside issue. It's an outside problem. People inside of a community that is experiencing crisis or that is experiencing injustice or systemic oppression, people inside the community generally don't need an awareness initiative. Like, people in Sierra Leone know that the healthcare system is weak. You know, most of the women that we spoke to know someone who died in childbirth. And so the awareness problem is our problem. And I think that we fix that problem by, trying to be careful about how we spend our attention and where we put our attention. Now, like, that's not to say that the only good place to put your attention is on the healthcare crisis in Sierra Leone. There are lots of places that need investment and lots of places that need support. This is just where we feel, I guess, where we feel called to be right now. Valerie thinks I should make the PowerPoint public. Oh, I will, Valerie, but not until we can actually announce this thing. So this is part of me kind of preparing for that, I guess, and thinking about how to talk about it and learning when I cry so that I don't say that stuff and say different stuff, etc. Okay. How many people are involved in Life's Library? Well, like, running it, there's about 5,000 subscribers between physical and digital, and lots of people who are involved but don't subscribe, which is fine. We wanted it to work for people who can't afford a subscription, and that's really important to us, and we hope that those people feel supported and fully part of the community. And then in terms of like who works on it, Brandy and Rachel at DFTBA, Nikki Hua in our office, and Rosiana and me, and the incredible team of mods who do the Lord's work. Yeah. How do you remain hopeful? I don't find it that hard, to be honest. I mean, I'm angry. I mean, I definitely felt angry in Sierra Leone, and I felt devastated at times. I felt really sad. People welcomed us into their lives in times of immense crisis, and as they were going through all kinds of difficulties. But I do not think that globally, child mortality has decreased by like 40% in the last 25 years. It's incredible. It's like one of the greatest better for lots of people. I also think that none of that like negates the suffering, especially when it's like needless suffering. So, yeah. Yeah, I think that the reason I'm hopeful is that I think we can raise this money, and I think we can build and support the building and maintaining of a really good center that will serve women and kids who really need our support. And I think it'll work. Like, if I didn't think that there was any way to make it better, then I would feel really despair. Like, I would feel really bummed out, and I would probably feel despair. But I do think there's a way to make it better. And I also think like there's evidence that this way of making it better works. Now, like I said earlier, that doesn't mean that it comes without risk, because in any community that has really fragile systems, there's always a lot of risk, right? But right now, all of that risk is being borne by the people who are most vulnerable. All of that risk is being borne by the people without any political power or any economic power, the people who can't access the healthcare system. Like, they are the ones who are living with that constant risk. None of the risk is being borne by me. And so, is there risk in doing it? Yeah, like, it might not work. It might be that in addition to it might not work, there's also the problem of like, things could change in terms of the political landscape. There could be all kinds of problems. The future is extremely unpredictable. But that risk is not something that's experienced by the people that we're seeking to serve, because they're already living with intolerable risk. So that's how I feel about it, I guess. Okay, I'm just gonna. I think my computer keeps going in and out. I don't know why, because I spent more money on this computer than it's going to cost to build that hospital in Sierra Leone. But it's very bad. Yeah, so I'll be making Vlogbrothers videos about this. It is a huge undertaking. It is much, much bigger than anything we've ever done before. It's bigger than, the Project for Awesome. It's because this is about, the amount of money we have to raise is intimidating. I was going to say but there is no but. That is the end of the sentence. But we have to raise it. I guess that's the end of the sentence. And so we've got to make plans. We've got to lay groundwork, and like that's part of why I'm talking to you now, is that y'all are on the ground floor of supporting this, in the sense that because of your membership to Life's Library, this is, you've already been doing this without knowing that you were doing it. And so I wanted to reach out to you and say thank you, and also I guess try to begin to explain what we've been up to with your money, and what we want to do moving forward. Hannah asks, and this is a great question, there are a lot of good books in the public domain. Have you thought about using some of those books for Life's Library? Yes, and that would solve the ebook and audiobook problems. It wouldn't necessarily solve the shipping problems, because some of those books are quite long and heavy, but it might solve the shipping problems if we were shipping Dover thrift editions. But then again, we don't want to like make the value proposition for you such that you're like, I paid $25 for this $2 book. This $2 copy of Gulliver's Travels that weighs 1 ounce. Like we want Life's Library to be something that really adds value to your life. And I think the philanthropy element is part of that, but it's only part of it, right? So, yeah. Is your next Life Library pick yours or Rosianna's? Fourth book is Rosianna's, right? Yeah, it's Rosianna's. But I know what my next book is, but I don't know what my book after that is. So we'll figure that out. Can you share what that rough number is? Yeah, I guess don't share it outside of here, but it's roughly, I guess there's 2 ways of thinking about it. It's roughly $5 million a year for 5 years. So it's roughly $25 million. Now, I have a slide that I didn't show you for my presentation with Hank, where I said it's a lot of money, but it's also not a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but the sense in which it's not a lot of money is the extent to which it could transform life for the 520,000 people who live in Kono District. And not just the lives of the people who are served directly by the hospital, but also every family in this, in the district who, you become more likely to survive to take care of your kids. Your kids become more likely to survive. That we also know that families where moms are healthy and survive childbirth are much more likely to have kids in school. Like there's a lot of ripple effects to this. So we know that so it's a lot of money. Almost all that money is in maintenance, is in maintaining stuff, not in building stuff. It's about 9% building, 91% stuff and staff and systems to make it work. But yeah, that's it. It's a lot of money, but also not a lot of money. Yeah. So we're gonna, I mean, Hank and I are gonna cover a lot of that, but we can't cover all of it. like literally can't. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll figure it out. Yeah, we're gonna work on it together. Yeah. Is there a way for people to donate directly to this project? Not yet, which is why we're not talking about it publicly yet, but there will be in time. There will be soon. And you know, what we'll be asking people to do is to join us in making a 5-year commitment. So whether you can give $10 a year or $10 a month, to think in your mind, like, what can I donate to this project in an ongoing way? Yeah, if just 1 million of us give $25, we'll be there. Are there concerns about the money going adrift from corruption and etc.? Yeah, definitely. Uh-oh, did I die? Did my little camera not, did it stop? I think I'm still going. I think I'm still here. Yes, there are definitely concerns. Those concerns are real and they're legitimate. I think PIH works really, really hard to minimize the amount that's lost to corruption everywhere they work. They work in a lot of difficult places. I think Sierra Leone's a difficult place to get stuff done and get it done efficiently, but I don't think it's the most difficult place where Partners in Health works. And so, yes, there are those concerns, but no, I don't think that's a reason not to do it. And in fact, if you look at the cost benefit analysis, it's really good. I think it's a really, I think it's a good deal, I guess is what I would say. I don't want this to come off as selfish, but if I donate in the future, will it be tax deductible? Oh, that's not selfish, Valerie. That's great. Yes, it will definitely be tax deductible. Yes, that's a key thing in the US, I think, because like for people who itemize their deductions, it's like 25 or 30% off the cost of the donation. So yeah, it's like any other charity. Only I would argue better. Can we look at the cost benefit analysis? Yeah, I mean, well, it's weird, right? Because like, what is the, like, you can't put a value on human life, and I really believe that, and I believe that all human lives are equally valuable, and that you can't put a monetary number on what a human life is worth. Like, what is a person's life worth to, what is my child's life worth to me more than all of my money? And so anytime you're talking about it, it's inherently a little weird because you're trying to value something that markets don't and shouldn't value. But in the US, they tend to say that like if $10,000 per adjusted life year saved is seen as a good investment. So if you can make a $7 million investment in a young child to help them, that will allow them to have a healthy life that otherwise they wouldn't have had, then that's seen as like a cost benefit win. We're talking about, thousands of people every year not dying. So yeah, I think it's a good deal. But I think it's really hard to like math out how good of a deal it is. Lindsay asks, I work with young children and I plan to have children of my own, maybe even during the scope of this project. Oh man, we've got a timeline, Lindsay. I'm excited. How do you recommend broaching these topics with kids without scaring them? It's really hard, right? Like, I mean, kids need to feel safe, and I don't think that anything that makes kids not feel safe is good. Like, I don't think it's good to, like, you know, I think it's important for kids to understand that, you know, that human life is diverse, and that not all kids have lives like theirs. But I don't want my kids to know, you know, that 1 in 17 moms in Sierra Leone dies in childbirth. Like, I just don't want my kids to know that. It's reality, and I will want them to know it eventually, but I don't want them to know it now. I do want them to know, and it is very important to us. I mean, it's something that we talk a lot about with our kids, and that they talk about with us. I do want them to know that, you know, that where we put our attention shapes the lives that we end up having, and it shapes the world we end up living in. And so I do want them to be focused on, you know, issues like malnutrition, and issues like children in the workforce. You know, like, we saw a lot of kids who have to work, which was heartbreaking. That was one of the most difficult. Yeah, it's just hard. It's hard. Yeah, sorry, I just became a broken record there. But yeah, I do want my kids to understand that there's you know, that there are big problems facing humans. But I also want them to know the truth, which is that, like, most kids, no matter where they live, grow up with love in their lives, grow up with support from their parents. And, you know, the main thing I saw, when we were with kids in Sierra Leone, was I saw families who love those kids, and who support their kids, and who want to take care of their kids, and who want the best for their kids, who want their kids to be able to go to school and have opportunities, and to be healthy, and who, you know, will do anything that they can to get their kids those opportunities. And so I want my kids to know that truth, you know, that, like, it isn't, you know, we can essentialize the lives of poor people in ways that I think are ultimately pretty destructive. Like, maybe they result in some, like, short-term sympathy, but, like, the lives of individuals are complex and multitudinous, no matter where they live, no matter what circumstances they're in. And just as it's easy to, like, essentialize the lives of super rich people, I think it's easy to dehumanize. Like, essentializing people can be a form of dehumanizing them. And so that's the other thing that, like, I talk to my kids about, is, like, don't assume that because somebody's poor, doesn't have access to, you know, a certain set of opportunities, that their life is a certain way, you know. And over again, like, that was brought home to me. Like, you go in, and it's been brought home to me lots of times in my life. Like, you go into a situation thinking you're the expert, thinking, you know, you have some, like, insight into the lives of other people, until you start listening and you realize, oh, I'm an idiot. Like, yeah, I probably should just shut up and listen, which I think is, like, the key to a lot of life. Yeah. So I feel like I've talked a lot, and this has, like, been an unexpected pleasure for me. And I hope it's been nice for y'all as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys about this. And we're just, you know, obviously we're just getting started. Please continue to ask questions about Life's Library in general. And yeah, we'll continue the conversation. I hope to be able to do this more often if it was fun for you, but no pressure if it wasn't. Yeah, I think there should be more of these in the future. I think it'd be good to do one for each book, because also, like, it can be like an overview of where we are with Life's Library, while also talking specifically about where we are with the Sierra Leone project, which, by the way, needs a name. So if you're in the name generation business, let us know what would be a good name. Maybe just the Sierra Leone project, but that's a little bland. All right, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with y'all about this, and thanks for being here. All right.